from the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, economies are gathering in Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea. In the face of difficulties and setbacks in the world trade and regional cooperation, APEC is a constant in upholding its core founding principles of promoting free trade and economic integration. Now, stakeholders are also eager to contribute to the 2020 agenda, which shall be strategic, practical, inclusive, and sustainable to ensure people-orientated prosperity and well-being. So what is the essence of APEC towards the Asian and global economic orders and governance today? What does the post-2020 agenda mean to us? And how can the international community improve global governance? To discuss these issues and more, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Professor Liu Baocheng of the University of International Business and Economics and Professor Carl Fei of the Aalto University School of Business in Finland. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Li Qiuyuan. All right, so gentlemen, let's talk about this. This year's APEC is themed as harnessing inclusive opportunities, embracing the digital future. So some of the keywords I noticed is digital connectivity, sustainable and inclusive growth, regional integration, and structural reform. First of all, Professor Fei, talk to us about your understanding about the priority of this year's APEC.
I think there's a balance of some what you might call modern things like increasing digital connectiveness and some more basic development such as making sure that we have inclusive growth. On the inclusive growth side of things, I think there are efforts both within a country to try to see that there's a little more evenly spreading of growth. We do have examples in the area, such as, for example, in Indonesia, where you have the 4 wealthiest people having the same number of assets, the same amount of assets as the 100 million poorest people in the country. Maybe this causes cause to reflect, especially when we look around the region and see that there are plenty of people that are not having all the basic services in healthcare and education, et cetera, that we would expect. I mean, for example, I think there are about 85,000 people that are dying in childbirth that with a little bit more medical care probably could not die in about 90% of those cases. And so I personally would like to see governments spend a little more effort on money on some of these basic needs, and I think that's one of the priorities that we see happening with this year's meeting.
And what about you, Professor Liu? What about China's role in APEC?
Well, the potential for the entire APEC countries, 21 countries, are really huge to tap. But in the same time, we do see that, number one, we have to face the reality. So connectivity, inclusiveness are the most important priorities that we need to address. But in the meantime, we are also future-oriented to embrace the digital economy and to have not only connectivity on the road, but also connectivity in the air. And now China is, we normally say, do you give them fish or teach them fishing skills? But on top of that, China also offers the fish market for them. So therefore, China provides aids, and China provides the management expertise and construction expertise. As a matter of fact, the very conference that leaders are held in meeting are really built by China. So, and also the 6-lane roads are also paved by Chinese workers and based on Chinese design. So this is a very pragmatic approach China is doing, and China has really operated zero tariff on those least developed countries. And right now, the comparative advantage that China has in the embracing innovation. For example, now the e-commerce is almost omnipresent, and the Huawei is also omnipresent across the entire region. Yes, the people criticize China. Well, you are forging a debt trap, but I think China is being more generous. Instead of debt trap, actually, in a number of cases, China falls into a credit trap. And so China has a lot of haircut with those, foreign aid and the free loan program. It is really the generous intention of the Chinese government to synergize and also to put more people into inclusion. And lastly, I think the China's openness and the China's success story in really integrating with the rest of the world in a proactive way is really a benchmark for many of those countries that are on the road for development.
There are some critical voices about China's policy here. For example, President Xi made a speech on Saturday, but we've also noticed that U.S. Vice President Mike Pence kind of exchanged some criticism in speeches too. Let me quote to you the words. So Mike Pence said there would be no let-up in President Donald Trump's policy of combating China's mercantilist trade policy and intellectual property theft that has erupted into a trade war between the two countries, and he also criticized China's global infrastructure drive, calling many of the projects low quality and settling developing countries with loans that they can't afford, like the debt trap you mentioned earlier. What's your response to this after hearing that?
Well, the first question is that do those people need it in reality to improve their living quality? So if there's a need, and who they are to fulfill, one is that you aid. Okay, the U.S. spread some of the chocolates, but the management is very poor in many of those cases. So look at Afghanistan. You know, I kick people out of the opium fields, but do you really offer them an alternative of living? And so justice is very noble, but prosperity is more practical. So China does offer the means to lead to prosperity. So pave the road. You know, can U.S. workers, can those people who are suffering from obesity, go there and do the blue work, do the dirty work? And Chinese workers are doing the job in a disciplined and professional way. And so then, China offers those loans, and because they have difficulty to borrow from the United States, from international organizations, and China is really doing the job to fit the real needs. Yes, when they grow up with their more buying power, there can be more made in China that can be exported. This is fair, and this is really mutual respect. It's not really an imposition.
Fitting the real need. Please feel free to jump in.
As well? Sure. I think that we should give China the benefit of the doubt. It is surely true that there are quite a few investment projects that have taken place so far that have resulted in what you would call a debt trap. But the question is, was this intentional, or did this just sort of happen? This is a new phase of China's engagement with the external world at this scale. And so I would like to hope that the Chinese government, is learning and reforming, and I think both parties have some responsibility to make sure they take on the amount of debt that's reasonable for them. And as you pointed out, not every, there was no other possibility. Having roads, having ports, having this infrastructure, having railroads is a potential help if, you can leverage that. You also talked about intellectual property, something the U.S. keeps on talking about. And I think we have to be honest that surely, China is not yet quite at the level that one would want internationally. On the other hand, there's a question of where were they and what are the steps that are being taken. And I think if you look at what's happened over the last year and over the last 5 years, we have to be pretty happy at the movement and the direction of movement that China's had in this and a whole bunch of things that the U.S. has mentioned. I mean, just look recently at this China International Import Expo in Shanghai. I mean, this is, the largest of its kind around the world, a real concrete step. Some will say it's just advertising. Well, yeah, there's probably a little bit of a positive spin on it. Maybe it happened a little sooner because of, political timing. Yeah. But this is helping companies to come into China, and not every country is engaging so much.
And we're...
Yeah. I think, yes, we cannot deny that there are a number of projects, or even mega projects, that really messed up. But as you said, this is not really the intention. It's really the lack of knowledge and lack of experience and lack of homework. And this also has to do that China didn't really have any colonial history over those regions. So we are really learning the local culture and local laws, etc. So how we can really increase our knowledge base and to create more capacity, not only for us but also for those local people. That's really the solution. But we cannot just take the problem that is created out of lack of knowledge into, say, a political intention or political deliberation to really launch a sort of a neo-colonization. This is not really the intention. If you look into the history, China, discovered those areas. Even in Africa, say almost 90 years ahead of Columbus, discovered America. But are there any black people who are growing cotton for us? Who are raising cows for us? So this is really the Chinese culture, and that is the culture that commands respect.
If I can just mention one other point on this. Surely, in general, I'm not a proponent of having a debt trap that countries and companies can't get out of. But there is also one advantage that is not often talked about in the media, and that is that if, for example, China builds a port, and that port is supposedly for a country or owned by a local company, let's say in Africa, and then they have to default on that, and a Chinese company takes over this. Well, this will pull Africa and China closer together because they'll want this to succeed long term. And this may have very good benefits for the growth of the country, such as the African country, in the long term.
Yeah.
So there are some positive things that can also happen from debt trap results.
Yeah. Let's talk more about APEC. This is a regional economic forum that's established in 1989, so almost 30 years on. We're now facing a very different picture. How do you interpret the challenges we're facing now, with the threat of nationalism, protectionism, unilateralism? Is there an APEC solution to this?
Well, I think the most encouraging thing is to see that APEC is continuing to push forward for example, this free trade zone. That in President Xi's speech earlier today, the central focus was about openness and inclusiveness of different economies, both in the APEC region and even beyond in this Belt and Road Initiative, trying to point out that it's not for a limited few, but for all, that we want to be inclusive. I think it would be really great if we could see, I think that the free trade agreement, this is probably the most important thing this year on the agenda of APEC, in my view. And if this could really happen in the near future, as is hoped, this would be great. Let's reflect back to the European Union and think about 2005, when one was looking to bring in countries like Poland and Hungary and Czech Republic. There was a real debate about if this was going to be a good thing or a bad thing for established European Union countries like Germany. A lot of people thought that there was going to start to be huge unemployment, all sorts of industries going to shift, but in fact what we saw was the opposite. We saw some of the best years that Germany's had after this expansion. So I think that this is a very good parallel for what will happen to China if this actually moves forward. It'll help China, but it's not only helping China, it's helping the entire region. And the U.S. government, with President Trump, despite being American myself, I have to say, has really opened up great possibilities for President Xi, for China, in taking a larger role in the region, a larger role politically, and to really be the free trade leaders, which is rather ironic since historically this has surely been a role that the U.S. has played.
It's not only to help the region, but take the specific case of Papua New Guinea, because Papua New Guinea is very reliant on the export of oil and the liquefied gas. ExxonMobil over there burning the money and digging holes, etc. But that really has turned out to be disappointing, because they didn't really pay enough of the tax to the government. It is really the Chinese company, PetroChina, who is really there to serve as a white knight, to offer big orders. And so we are helping American companies also. So therefore, Xi Jinping said very wisely that actually we are not really denying any third country participation. Actually, by working together to defend the basic rationale of bring all economic resources together, we can generate productivity and efficiency. So we have been lectured by Americans, by Europeans. This is a basic economic theory, but now we are practicing more subtly and more effectively. So that's the case now.
Interesting. Hold your thoughts. We're going to take a short break and come back to this. All right, let's take a short break here on The Dialogue. Stay with us. Much more ahead right after this. Welcome back to the dialogue. Now, APEC leaders adopted the Bogor goals in Indonesia in 1994, which stipulate that developed economies will liberalize and facilitate trade and investment by 2010, and then developing countries by 2020. And we are just 2 years away from that deadline. What do you think will happen next in terms of post-2020 agenda, Professor?
Well, I think that this is going to continue. I think that it's not like you reach these goals and you stop. Look at the U.S. I think this is a really good example of this. That few would have thought that the U.S. would be so sort of anti-free trade as they are today. It shows that this agenda is forever. One has to continue pushing forward, and there will always be new emerging areas, such as the digitalization that one is looking at this year and so forth. I think that people overestimate a little bit the sort of, we do it till 2020, and then what's next? I think it's very clear there's a continuing lot to do for a long time.
What about your expectations? Any specific, adoption or reforms that we're going to see?
Well, APEC was created more as a contingency mode to weather the financial crisis that took place in Asia. But now concretization is now on the top agenda. We used to look beyond the borders at how we can really get better connected and how to reduce the tariff that block the freer transaction. But now, behind the border is also on the top agenda now, because over the last few years, the APEC has been focusing on how we can really streamline the domestic policies that can really be harmonized together to remove those roadblocks in a domestic market is now the major focus. So, number one, how we can really harness the regulatory framework, because there are different legal systems, there are different dispute settlement mechanisms. So that's one thing. The other is that, how can we really together create a equal level playing field for competition? And then government, in the public sector, how are those fiscal policies, etc., can be at least made more transparent. And the private sector governance are also important. So it is not only a transactional approach, it is a relational approach, and also it's an integrational approach. So to embrace new technology, of course, is also part of the priority.
If I could just add one thing here. You ask what's next. There has been this push to sort of lower taxes, lower import duties, etc. But things can go too far. Let me give you an example. Right now, I think there's a little bit of a race to the bottom in corporate tax rates. If we look back about 15 years ago, we saw average corporate tax rates in the Asian region being about 33%. They're now down to about 21%. There's a question of how far you should go, because if you get too low, governments don't have enough resources to actually be able to deal with healthcare, to be able to deal with the education that is so needed for the continual development of everyone, and this inclusiveness that is one of the things. The other thing that I think is really good about APEC is that they have normally had a focus. They have these 3 focuses this year. And I hope that this will continue, because I think that's been one of the things that's helped it to be more productive than some other organizations that are getting together in a broader way.
And Professor Liu earlier mentioned there are efforts being done on streamlining domestic policies, removing some of the roadblocks when countries are cooperating with each other. What's your take on the internal mechanism of this organization in terms of managing the differences among different members?
Well, I think the most important thing is not the internal mechanisms, but is simply that one continues to have high political will from the government leaders at the highest levels. But I think it's also, and so President Xi's visit there this weekend and speech today is a perfect example of this, and this is happening repeatedly year after year, which is really important. Secondly, I think it's a really good situation that they have, they have quite a number of preparatory meetings spaced out with teams really working on things. So it's not simply people coming together to sort of talk and meet, which is useful, but it's really trying to make some concrete progress on some specific themes. I think this sort of preparatory work that they have is a pretty good mechanism, and getting some previous high-level leaders to be involved in leading these things has worked pretty well. Is it perfect? No, but it's hard to sort of legislate internationally that you must. You really have to have the will of the countries coming together wanting.
Yeah. Now I want to take a look at the ties between China and Papua New Guinea. What can be done to further facilitate the relationship between the two countries, Professor Liu?
Well, the basis is really respect and also mutual trust. So the New Guinea is a very underdeveloped country. Under the shuffling of so many colonies, from Portuguese to Britishers to Japanese, etc. So they managed the dependence, and now it is really the interdependency that really matters. Yes, now they are still under a very strong wind of Australia. But now China contributes aid, just next to Australia. And actually the commitment for China to offer the aid will be 4 times of Australia down the road. And the more realistically, to pave the road, to build the telecommunication, to make sure that, ordinary people have access to gas, although they export a lot of gas, and to electricity. I think this is really something very practical. Instead of, the American way, okay, we have more budget on the military defense, to patrol all around. So we do the right type of homework for people that are really critically needed. And also environmental protection is also utterly important. China is having the problem, and China realized there are solutions to it. So China is also offering, and more importantly, it's really the human capacity building. It is the people who are really having the vision, having the skills to make a better life. So for example, on my campus, we have nearly 4,000 international students. Most of them are international scholarship offered by the Chinese government. We also offer very effective training program for government officials from different underdeveloped countries. So now I think we can really give more quota for scholarship for New Guinea. And also we can really run joint training programs, schools together locally towards a specific project. So I think there are many effective ways, but one key is that be realistic and be pragmatic, and we do the work instead of, spread the talk.
Realistic and pragmatic. Now, Mike Pence also announced that U.S. would be involved in a plan by its ally Australia to jointly develop a naval base there in Papua New Guinea. How to interpret the move? Do you think that we're going to see some competition there?
I think that's probably obviously the intention. Exactly how to play out, I think, remains to be seen, as China surely has, played a very central role in Papua New Guinea. I think we simply have to wait and see, but I'm sure that's the goal of the U.S.
Professor Liu on this?
Yeah, for leadership, there are 3 ways to shape it. One is coercion. Okay, I have a stronger arm, so you've got to listen to me. And the other is, you offer the benefit, and third is that you offer inspiration for people to see a future. And China, fortunately, chose the latter 2, so we offer them the, also offer our own self the dream to build the community of the future, and also to engage in practical, projects. And so I think next is really how we can really harness the rules that we can play together, and how really we can contribute in environmental protection and also poverty alleviation. So let the other powers to do the power work and to do the coercion, and we do the inspiration, and we do the benefit that we can offer.
Yeah. Now, you earlier mentioned that free trade agreement are key topics there at this year's APEC. What about the prospects of, FTAAP? What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's probably going to happen. I think there seems to be surely a will from China, it looks like, and I think we're going to see this move forward. I'm reasonably happy with what I hear. I'm much more confident now than I was a year ago about this, and that's really encouraging, especially in a global sense where we see a lot of protectionism, growing in let's say the most Western countries. There's still obstacles. There are still a lot of details to work out, and it's not a done deal, but I think it's going to happen.
What about you, Professor?
Well, I think the consensus is already there that further integration will bring benefit and efficiency to all members. But right now, there are many of those integration programs, be it ASEAN, be it ASEAN +1, be it trilateral agreements between China, South Korea, and Japan, and now a bigger one is the RCEP. So right now, how we can really integrate the intention for integration, and we can really benchmark. Although we cannot really catch up the EU integration program, that we need a better leadership, and we need the capacity to write the rules of the road. And we need a stronger secretariat to coordinate different type of efforts so that we can really form one, because otherwise we still see rather a fragmentation.
Now, we also understand the Chinese president held talks with leaders of Pacific Island nations that have established diplomatic ties with China. What about countries that hasn't established official ties with China? What do you think, how things are going to unfold there?
Well, until the people realize, which is the most important choice for them, and this is a situation in actually the Caribbean area in Latin America, and now, many of those countries like Costa Rica, the Panama, and more to come to the mainland because, who offers the best chocolate? And the people out there have to make their choice, and China is not really imposing any of those conditions onto them. And the other is that how we can really synergize again in the capacity building for those people. So if there are stubborn choices, so let it be. But we are open, and we open our full arms for them to join China. So the trend is very clear now.
All right, we're running out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for all your insights, Professor Carl Fei and Professor Liu Baoqiu. Many thanks.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Dialogue here on CGTN. Thank you so much for your company. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.